Nobody is going to come and build you. Not a mentor, not a motivational speaker, not a perfect set of circumstances that finally lines up and gives you permission to become who you are capable of being. That is not how it works. That has never been how it works. The men who become genuinely formidable, the ones who walk into a room and carry something that cannot be faked, did not get there by waiting. They got there by disappearing, by withdrawing from the noise, from the performance, from the constant need to be seen working, and doing the invisible work that most people are not willing to do because no one is watching and there is no applause and the progress is almost impossible to measure in the short term. They read when they did not feel like reading. They trained when their body was arguing with them. They stayed quiet when everything inside them wanted to react, explain, defend, and be understood. And one day, quietly, without announcement, they became someone different. Not a better-looking version of who they were. Something deeper. Something that the old version of themselves could not have imagined surviving, let alone embodying. That process has a name. The Stoics called it inner work, and it is the only work that actually changes a man at the level that matters. Today, we are going to talk about what that process actually looks like, not as inspiration, as a map. Because you already have the fire, what you need is the architecture. Part 1. The battle happens in private. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man alive in his era. He commanded legions. He governed millions. He held the fate of an empire in his decisions. And every morning, before any of that began, he sat alone and wrote to himself. Not for posterity, not for publication, for the same reason a fighter reviews his technique before a match, because he understood that what happens in the public arena is always a reflection of what has been built in private. The meditations were not a philosophical treatise, they were a daily argument with himself, a refusal to let comfort win, a series of reminders that the battle for character is always internal before it is external, that the man who cannot govern his own mind has no business governing anything else. Most men have this backwards. They are polished on the outside and chaotic on the inside.
I can handle it.
They manage their appearance and neglect their interior. They invest heavily in how they are perceived and almost nothing in who they actually are when no one is watching. The perception without substance is fragile. It cracks under real pressure. The first genuinely hard thing that arrives exposes the gap between the image and the reality. Substance without performance is something else entirely. It is quiet, it is dense.
You dare defy me! I am the voice of Rome!
It shows in the way
your
a man
silence
handles
is your
what goes
confession!
wrong, in how long it
The
takes
gods
before he
themselves
reacts,
witness
in
your
whether
fall.
his decisions come from fear or from values, in whether he is the same person alone as he is in a crowd. That kind of substance is built in private, in the hours no one records, in the decisions no one rewards, in the commitments kept when every reasonable excuse to abandon them is available. That is where the real man is forged, not in the moments of triumph, in the ordinary, unglamorous, unseen hours that the triumphant moments are built on top of. Part 2. Feed your mind, or it will feed on you. Seneca wrote something that cuts through all modern noise with surgical precision. He said that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Think about that honestly. How much of your suffering in any given week is the result of something that actually happened versus something your untrained mind invented? An anticipated conversation that went badly in your head before it happened at all. A future problem that may never materialize but has already consumed hours of your present. A past event that is finished and unchangeable but that you keep returning to as though revisiting it enough times will somehow produce a different outcome. An undisciplined mind does not protect you, it tortures you. It generates threats that do not exist and catastrophizes threats that do. It replays the past and rehearses worst-case futures and rarely, if ever, fully inhabits the present moment where your actual life is happening. The solution is not meditation alone, though that helps. The solution is input, deliberately, consistently, feeding your mind with ideas that are harder and more nourishing than the chaos it generates on its own.
You owe me for the spices!
This is what the Stoics meant when they talked about study,
For the poor,
not
kind
academic achievement, not
Pay now or
credentials.
leave!
The
You'll
daily
regret
practice of
this!
sitting with difficult ideas, wrestling with them honestly, and emerging from the encounter having changed slightly in the direction you intend. Every book you read in that spirit is not just information absorbed. It is a conversation with someone who has already been through something you have not yet faced. Marcus Aurelius in the pages of the Meditations, Epictetus in the Discourses, Seneca in his letters. These men faced difficulty at a scale most of us will never encounter, and they left behind a record of how they thought through it. When you study that material, you are not just learning philosophy. You are borrowing their hard-won architecture and installing it in your own mind. You are building the ability to hold complexity without panicking, to face uncertainty without collapsing, to sit inside a problem and think clearly rather than react from fear. That capacity does not arrive as a gift. It is built, 1 hour at a time, one difficult page at a time. In the quiet, when no one else is in the room and there is nothing entertaining waiting to replace the discomfort of genuine thought. Feed your mind deliberately, or accept that it will feed on whatever is available, and what is available, by default, is noise. Part 3. Train the body to build the character. Philosophy without the body is incomplete. The Stoics understood this. They did not separate the training of the mind from the training of the physical self. Because the same qualities required to maintain a physical discipline under difficulty, the willingness to stay when every instinct says leave, the ability to distinguish between pain that signals damage and pain that signals growth, the practice of choosing discomfort voluntarily so that involuntary discomfort loses its power over you. Those are not just athletic qualities, they are character qualities. When you walk into training on a morning when your body argues and your mind negotiates and you do it anyway, you are not primarily building muscle or endurance. You are building evidence. Evidence that the voice telling you to stop is not the final authority, that you can hear it fully and choose otherwise, that what you decide to do matters more than how you happen to feel in any given moment. That evidence accumulates, not visibly, not immediately. But over weeks and months it becomes something the mirror cannot show you, but you can feel in how you move through difficulty. In how long it takes for something hard to genuinely shake you. In the quiet, unspoken confidence that comes not from being told you are capable, but from having proven it to yourself, alone, without an audience, repeatedly. James Clear reduced this process to its most honest form. You are not the person who has big intentions. You are the person built by what you repeatedly do. Not occasionally, repeatedly. The man who trains 3 times a week for 2 years is a fundamentally different man than the one who was inspired for 3 weeks and then stopped. Not because of the physical results, because of who he became in the process of showing up when it was inconvenient. Every discipline chosen voluntarily makes involuntary hardship more manageable. Every morning you override comfort. You are rehearsing the response you will need when life overrides it for you, and life will, guaranteed. Train now while the stakes are yours to choose, because the training you do in the quiet will be the resource you draw on when the loud moments arrive. Part 4. Silence is a weapon. Most men never learn to use the ego cannot survive in silence. That is not an insult. It is an observation about the fundamental nature of the part of you that needs to be seen, validated, understood, and approved of. The ego requires an audience. It requires performance. It requires the constant reassurance that comes from explaining yourself, defending your position, filling space with words that prove you are worth listening to. Silence starves all of that. And when those needs are starved long enough, what remains is something quieter and far more powerful: clarity. Epictetus understood this better than almost anyone. As a man who had been owned by another human being who had experienced the most extreme form of powerlessness imaginable, he arrived at a philosophy that placed total sovereignty inside the one domain that could never be taken from him: his own judgment, his own response, the space between what happened to him and what he chose to do with it. That space is only accessible in silence. In the noise of constant reaction and constant performance, it disappears. You are always responding to the last thing that happened, instead of choosing from something deeper. Silence is not the absence of thought. It is the practice of directed thought, the discipline of not filling every gap with words, the willingness to observe before speaking, to understand before responding, to let a moment land completely rather than immediately deflecting it with language. The man who speaks less holds more. He holds more information about the room because he has been listening rather than performing. He holds more credibility because his words are not diluted by volume. He holds more composure under pressure because he has not spent all his energy managing his own narration. And crucially, he hears himself more clearly. The inner voice that knows exactly what to do, the one that is usually drowned out by noise and urgency and the constant clamor of the ego. That voice becomes audible in silence. And when you can hear it, you stop making decisions from fear and habit and start making them from something that actually knows you. Practice silence as a discipline, not as passivity, as intention. Speak when you have something that matters. Stay quiet when you do not. And in the space that silence creates, build something that noise never could. Part 5. The morning is where the man is decided before the world makes its demands, before the phone fills with other people's urgency, before the noise of the day has arrived and staked its claim on your attention. There is a window. It is small, it is quiet. And what you do inside it is not a minor detail. It is an identity statement. The man who uses that window without negotiation is telling himself something every single morning. He is telling himself who he is, not who he hopes to be someday. Who he is right now demonstrated by what he does when nothing external is forcing him to do anything at all. He studies something. He moves his body. He sits in enough silence to hear himself think. Not because he woke up feeling like it, because he has made a decision about the kind of man he is, and this is what that man does. The feeling is irrelevant. The decision is the architecture. Marcus Aurelius described this in terms that are almost uncomfortable in their directness. He wrote a reminder to himself to get out of bed and do the work he was made to do. Not when he felt inspired, not when conditions were favorable. When the alarm went off, when the day was cold, when the body wanted to stay horizontal, and the mind offered 100 reasonable arguments for why tomorrow would be a better day to start. He wrote those words because he needed them. The Emperor of Rome needed a written reminder to get out of bed. That should tell you something important about motivation. It is not a privilege granted to the exceptional. It is a battle everyone fights. The difference is in who has built a system that does not require winning that battle every single morning. Motivation is weather. Identity is architecture. Weather is unpredictable. It changes without notice. Architecture holds regardless of conditions. Build the architecture. Make the decision once and then stop making it every morning. Replace the negotiation with a structure that the undisciplined version of you cannot talk you out of. Because the morning version of you, the one who just woke up and has not yet done the work, that version will always argue for comfort. Do not negotiate with him. The man you are becoming does not need that version's approval to get started. Part 6. The gap between stimulus and response. The Stoics were obsessed with a space so small that most people never notice it exists. The gap between what happens to you and what you do next. In that gap, they argued, is the entirety of human freedom. Everything you cannot control, which is most of what happens in a life, lives outside that gap. But your response, your interpretation, the meaning you assign, the action you take, that lives inside it. And that is yours, completely, permanently, regardless of circumstances. The undisciplined man has no gap. Something happens and he reacts, immediately, from whatever emotional state he happened to be in, from fear, from pride, from anger, from the accumulated irritations of the day. His response is determined by his mood, and his mood is determined by whatever last touched it. The man who has studied, trained, and practiced silence has a different experience. The same event happens, but before the response there is a pause, not a long one, sometimes barely perceptible, but it is real. And in that pause, instead of reacting from the surface, he responds from principle. He has rehearsed this, not in some abstract philosophical sense. He has rehearsed it in physical training, where the voice that tells him to quit arrives and he observes it without obeying it. He has rehearsed it in silence, where the urge to perform and explain arises and he lets it pass without acting on it. He has rehearsed it in study, where difficult ideas challenged what he thought he knew, and he stayed with the discomfort instead of dismissing it. The response that emerges from that gap is not weakness. It is the highest expression of strength available to a human being. It is the difference between being at the mercy of your circumstances and being the author of your own character, regardless of them. Ryan Holiday framed the modern version of this simply: the obstacle is the way, not in spite of it, through it. The difficulty is not what stands between you and growth. It is the mechanism of growth. And that reframe, practiced until it becomes instinct, changes what difficulty means to you at a fundamental level. It stops being something to avoid and starts being something to use. That is what discipline builds over time. Not a life without hard things. A man who cannot be broken by them. Closing. One day, and you will not be able to mark exactly when it happened. You will look back at the version of yourself that began this work and barely recognize him. Not because you became someone else, because you became more fully yourself. The accumulated weight of the performing, the seeking, the reacting, the explaining, all of it gradually stripped away by the steady practice of study and training and silence, until what remains is something more honest and more capable than what was there before. That is what the Stoics were building toward. Not a perfect man, a real one. A man whose inner life matches his outer life, whose private self is at least as strong as his public one, who does not need external validation because he has become his own evidence. That transformation is not visible as it happens. The people around you will sense something shifting before they can name what it changed. You will carry yourself differently. You will react less and respond more. You will stop explaining yourself to people who were never genuinely asking. You will stop seeking approval from people whose opinion of you says more about them than it does about you. And the work itself will change. At first it feels like discipline imposed from outside, like something you are forcing yourself to do. Over time it becomes something else, not easy, but natural. The way a craftsman relates to his trade, not because every day is pleasant, because the work itself is where he is most himself. Marcus Aurelius governed a crumbling empire and still found time every morning to write honestly about who he was trying to be. Epictetus was legally property and built the most internally free philosophy in recorded history. Seneca knew his own failures intimately and wrote about them without flinching because he understood that honesty with himself is the first requirement of becoming someone you can respect. They were not perfect men. They were relentless ones. Men who returned to the work regardless of how they felt about it. Men who understood that the quiet hours, the invisible hours, the hours that produced no visible result and received no recognition, those were not the price of transformation. They were transformation itself. You do not need permission to begin. You do not need to feel ready. You do not need the right circumstances, or the right moment, or the right level of motivation. You need to sit down, open the book, lace up the shoes, close the mouth, and return to the work one more time. The man you are becoming is not waiting at the end of this process. He is being built inside it, right now, in this decision, and the next one, and the one after that. Begin again tomorrow. Do it in silence. Show everything through the work. If this reached something real in you, leave a comment below, just 3 words. I do the work. That is your commitment. Not to this channel, to yourself. Subscribe to Stoic Journal and turn on the bell. Every week content built for the men who are doing this quietly, without applause, in the only arena that actually matters. Until next time, study, train, be silent, and become what you already know you are capable of.